Hafa Days Ontario, everybody. My name is Bonnie Gio Sagana, but you guys can call me Gio. And today I am so excited to teach you guys about Chapter 11, which is the Autism Spectrum Disorder. For today's bell work, we are going to be doing an activity known as this or that, which is more inclusive. You will be given 2 choices each round, 5 rounds in total, with each choice showing different ways of interacting, communicating, or setting up an environment. For each pair, think about which option feels more inclusive for individuals with autism. There are no trick questions, and sometimes both choices may seem okay, but one may be more flexible or accessible. And most importantly, be open minded and keep kindness at the center of your choices. Your first round is communication style, which is more inclusive. Answering questions vaguely and with sarcasm, or answering questions with clarity and rechecking to see if the individual understands. Round 2, styles of communication, which is more inclusive, offering multiple ways to communicate, such as speech, text, etc., or expecting everyone to speak verbally. Round number 3, testing support, which is more inclusive, offering extended time on tests or having a strict time limit for everyone. Round number 4 is classroom tools, which is more inclusive, only giving verbal reminders or using visual schedules. And lastly, round number 5 is behavior in class, which is more inclusive, respecting stimming such as fidgeting, rocking, jumping in class, or inhibiting students stimming by telling them to stop distracting. For the bellwork answers, the correct answer for number 1 is answering questions with clarity and rechecking understanding. Clear words make it easier to understand, and checking makes sure they got it. Number 2 is offering multiple ways to communicate, such as speech, text, pictures, or more. Everyone communicates differently, so more options make it fair. Number 3, offering extended time on tests. Some students need more time to think and focus. Number 4 is using visual schedules. Pictures or lists make routines easier to follow. And number 5, respecting stimming, such as fidgeting, rocking, or jumping. Stimming can help students calm down and focus if it isn't hurting anyone. So, what are we going to achieve today? Here are the student learning objectives. 11-1, we will describe how the lives of people with autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD, have changed since the advent of IDEA. 11-2, we will explain the various definitions and classifications of ASD. 11-3, we will describe the characteristics and prevalence of children and youth with ASD. 11-4, we will list the causes and risk factors associated with ASD. 11-5, we will describe the assessment procedures used to identify ASD in children and youth. And then lastly, 11-6, we will describe the different interventions for children and youth with ASD from early childhood through adulthood. So our classroom norms are very, very simple. We are going to practice active listening, value respect, and actively engage. But the most important for me is have fun. I want you guys to have fun while we are learning. So for your warm-up activity, it's something I call Cloud Brainstorm. Give 5 reasons as to why person first language is important or can be beneficial to fill your cloud. So in the cloud, you have 5 arrows, and I want you guys to give 5 reasons as to why person first language is important. Some examples of person first language include students with ADHD or individual with ASD. So for the chapter overview, we have 6 sections that we are going to be talking about, starting with changing era, definitions and classifications, characteristics and prevalence, causes and risk factors, identification and assessment, and lastly, interventions and treatment. The first one we're going to be talking about is changing era in the lives of people with autism spectrum disorder. This is the first out of many definitions we will be talking about in terms of ASD, but it is basically a range of functions with a restricted and repetitive repertoire of behaviors, interests, or activities. So, what is IDEA? The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, is a U.S. federal law that ensures students with disabilities receive a free and appropriate public education tailored to their individual needs. So there were very major differences pre-IDEA and post-IDEA. First off, we're going to be talking about pre-IDEA, which was prior to 1975. Educations for students with disabilities were not guaranteed, and their classification was under mental retardation or serious emotional disturbance. In terms of teacher quality, there wasn't usually a training for them to meet unique needs, and also family involvement was very limited. But Post IDEA talks about how they have made changes. It gained access to appropriate educational services and individualized education programs. It also classified as its own recognized disability category under the law. It began receiving specialized training in autism education, and also there was a heavy involvement in the process with parents. There's also been some social impacts with ASD. It helped with public awareness of ASD, recognized it as a spectrum, and although portrayed in media, it may not be accurate, but can be screened through guidelines for realistic depictions. At this time, ASD was also in the same level as other syndromes such as Savant syndrome and Asperger's syndrome. And some examples of ASD being portrayed in media includes Patricia Tanis of Borderlands, Sheldon Cooper of Big Bang Theory, and also Black Manta from DC Comics. Next, we're going to be moving on to definitions and classifications of autism spectrum disorder. ASD is usually diagnosed by a medical professional, such as a psychologist or psychiatrist, but based on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder criteria, also known as the DSM-MD. There has been a lot of shifts in the diagnostic labels of ASD, starting with DSM-1, where they labeled it as schizophrenic reaction childhood type, DSM-2 labeling it as schizophrenia childhood type, and the first introduction of the word autism was in DSM-3, and then DSM-4 has a pervasive developmental disorder label, and then with our current DSM, which is DSM-5, autism spectrum disorder was introduced. So here's one more definition of individuals with disabilities and how they determine what autism is. Autism means a developmental disability significantly affecting verbal and nonverbal communication and social interactions, generally evident before age 3 that adversely affects educational performances. They also had some characteristics that they wanted to describe, such as repetitive activities and stereotype movements, resistance to environmental change or changes in daily routines, and also unusual response to sensory experiences. One fun fact is that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act's definition of autism was actually inspired by DSM 4. And then there was another secondary definition of ASD. It was defined as the early presence of a combination of persistent deficits early in a child's life that causes clinically significant impairments. These deficits can include social communication and interaction, restrictive repetitive patterns, and also behaviors, interests, and activities. And now we're going to be talking about the classification specifically in school systems. At this time, school personnel does not have to be reliant on DSM, and depending on state, child may not need medical diagnosis to qualify for specific classes. Students with ASD and have shown success may possibly not qualify for special education, thus utilizing a 504 plan. So now we're going to be talking about the characteristics and prevalence of autism spectrum disorder. There are two main ones that I will be talking about, which is social communication and interaction, and restricted and repetitive behaviors. In terms of social communication and interaction, they have a difficulty with back and forth conversations, trouble with verbal cues such as jokes, and also different speeches. And in terms of restrictive and repetitive behavior, they've shown repetitive movements in speech and also need for routines and fixated interests. 11-3B talks about other conditions that they may have with three types that I will be talking about today. So the first one is developmental conditions, which is the most common out of the three. And this can be like ADHD, motor coordinations, or more. And then mental conditions are found among many children with ASD, such as anxiety, OCD, and others. And then medical conditions are also a part of this, with epilepsy being seen as the most common medical condition, affecting approximately 46%. But there are unique strengths in terms of ASD, and I will be talking about the three ones that were listed in the textbook. So the first one is splinter skill. This is a specific topic mastery that students usually fixate on. It can be history, math, or even instruments. And then talent mastery is usually the physical traits that they're really good at, such as playing instruments and dancing. And then overall mastery is known as prodigies, who have a mixture of splinter skill and talent. Now, we will be talking about prevalence. Prevalence has been a really huge challenge to collect data and interpret due to uncontrollable factors that lead to difficulties in reporting accurate rates. But there is still a recorded rate that we found in the textbook, which is 22 to 70 people per 10,000, which is also one child of 143 diagnosed with ASD. More data shows that in 14 observed cities, the rate was 1 for every 68 individuals. And in terms of gender, males outnumber females with a ratio of 5 to 1. And then for race and ethnicity, non Hispanic white individuals are more likely to have ASD than non Hispanic Black people. We will be moving on to causes and risk factors of autism spectrum disorder. So, when learning about the causes and risk factors, there is something called integrated etiology that states that there is neither a cause nor a cure for ASD. But there are some contributors to the cause, such as genetic, infectious, neurological, metabolic, and immunological factors. Wide media led to people believing that vaccines would cause autism, but in meta analytic research, there is no relations between the two. And there's no such thing as single autism gene. Biology and genetic plays a major role in understanding the cause and risks of ASD. So some statistics shows that 59% of ASD cases are linked to gene variant or mutations. 60 genes were identified to have a 90% risk factor for a child developing autism, and also identical twins are more likely to have ASD than fraternal twins. Next, we will be talking about the identification and assessment of autism spectrum disorder. So I tried to condense it as much as possible into 6 steps, with the first step being parental concerns. Usually in this stage, parents start to notice red flags in their child's first or second year, which are in terms of their skills. And then that would usually lead them to the second step, which is pediatric visit, bringing concerns to the pediatrician using screening tools and development tests for accurate referrals. Next step is screenings, where universal screenings are usually happening 18 months, with additional screenings happening when needed. And then the fourth step is referral, where a child is referred to a multidisciplinary team. These are individuals who are professionals in different disciplines. And then the next step is comprehensive evaluation using language, intelligence, and social interactions. And then the diagnosis and intervention is the last step, where a team will confirm ASD and develop the individualized services. So now we're at the last step, which is the interventions and treatment for autism spectrum disorder. The first one I will be talking about is 11-6A, which is early intervention. It starts before the age of 3, either services or in home therapy, and they may qualify for early childhood education with a specific designed program. Some benefits are receiving support for skills like speech, behavioral management, or any related services, and also critical long lasting effects are a sign during early intervention. And now for 11-6B, it talks about elementary education. IEP, also known as Individualized Education Programs, determines services by the age of 5, incorporating things such as strengths and interests. Locations can differ in this stage, such as classrooms or home, and high functioning students may or may not only need a 504 with accommodations. 11-6C talks about adolescent education and transition. One big fact about this is after the age of 22, an individual will no longer be qualified for free and appropriate education. So there are following steps that will help the students transition into their next step. The first step is identifying transition goals, linking post-secondary goals with IEP goals, troubleshooting and adjusting transition IEP goals, and providing opportunities to teach skills. And then the last step is 11-6D, which is evidence based practice. The first one I will be talking about is collaborative communication, which is very crucial to a student's success. So the first one is augmented alternate communication, also known as AAC. It assists nonverbal students in communicating effectively. And then the second one is behavioral strategies. With the first one, I will be talking about being applied behavior analysis, also known as ABA. It breaks tasks into smaller steps with positive reinforcement. And another type of behavioral strategy is positive behavior intervention and support, also known as PBIS, creating supportive structures to promote positive behaviors. So, for social skills and development, there is training, which utilizes role playing, peer training, and more to teach social skills and emotional recognition. The next one is functional skills instructions, which focus on life skills, visual support, which utilizes videos to provide structure, and teacher creativity to use students' interests to motivate them to learn. Lastly, parent collaboration is a very vital part of everything here, which works closely with the parent to monitor in home developments. So, after everything we've learned, I'm going to be doing a main activity known as application to major or career. We have a lot of majors here. We are different strands of education, such as early childhood, rehabilitation and human services, special education, and elementary education. So, for this activity, I want you to answer the following questions with the thought of how you can apply what you learned to your major or even your career, and answer each questions with 2 to 3 sentences. The first question I want you to answer is, how does this new information that you learned connect with your major or field? And then your second question is, what is one information from the presentation you will use or keep in mind as you move on with your major? And then your last question is, how can you ensure that you serve your future clients or students who have ASD to feel included? So, what did we achieve today? In 11-1, we were able to describe how the lives of people with autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD, have changed since the advent of IDEA. In 11-2, we explain the various definitions and classifications of ASD. In 11-3, we describe the characteristics and prevalence of children and youth with ASD. In 11-4, we listed the cause and risk factors associated with ASD. In 11-5, we describe the assessment procedures used to identify ASD in children and youth. And lastly, in 11-6, we describe the different interventions for children and youth with ASD from early childhood through adulthood. And for your assessment today, I want you guys to do something called Fill Out, which is a quiz platform. You can scan the QR code to lead you to the website. Just one thing to note is after you answer questions, you have to click the answer button to see your results, but that doesn't mean that you fully submitted it. Once you finish reviewing your results, you have to click submit to complete the overall survey. Thank you so much, guys, for listening, and I hope you guys were able to learn more about ASD and to continue using this in your path during your education field. Bye, guys!